And I'm your host, Robert Jordan. Everyone, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. All right, guys, one of the issues that many of us hoped Trump would address was the power of these social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and etc. Because if you remember, they vowed that Trump would never be elected again. Okay, after his first election, they said that will not happen again. And so a lot of governments are starting to figure out just how much trouble these people could cause, and they're throwing them out the country. It's something Americans should consider. Okay? I don't think it's dictatorial to do something like that when these people can cause so much trouble. But anyway, here's Uganda. Okay, and I'm going to go back and show you a couple other articles. Government of Uganda bans Twitter from country after censorship, election interference. Okay? The government of Uganda has disabled Twitter within its borders for election interference. Days after oligarch Jack Dorsey took the initiative to suspend accounts supportive of President Museveni. President Museveni is known as a devout Christian and has been the target of animosity from Western governments and global corporations for his staunch opposition to homosexualism. Uganda's election is scheduled for Thursday, and the state has suspended Facebook and Twitter services for systematic bias against his national resistance movement. The president warns that the social media channels like Facebook and Twitter are not being friendly and equitable to all the Ugandans. Then there's no reason as to why we should have them operate here. That's what we should say here, people. If they're not equitable between the Democrats and the Republicans, then they shouldn't operate here. The social channel you're talking about, if it's going to operate in Uganda, it should be used equitably by everyone who wants to use it, Museveni said, of Twitter and Facebook. If you want to take sides against the national resistance movement, then that group will not operate in Uganda. The big tech firm platform commenced to wind up a storm after facing consequences for censorship, conveniently dismissing the reality that they were engaged in a wide-ranging campaign to censor figures associated with Museveni just days before a national election. They were tipping the election scale in Uganda, and they got caught. The country's communications oversight agency ordered internet service providers to block service to the Western social media platforms as a means to erode their capabilities. Okay? So they had to shut them down, people. And that's not the only country that's doing this. Countries are turning off the internet to stop violence. Does it work? Okay? This is the Sudan back in 2019. Governments are increasingly shutting down the access to the internet in an effort to curb organized violence. But evidence shows it usually makes things worse. In early June, protesters took to the streets of Sudan's capital, Khartoum, to demand a civilian-led government. Shortly afterwards, Sudan's ruling military junta turned off the internet. This is an isolated incident. This isn't an isolated incident. There have been more than 100 internet shutdowns around the world this year already. Not a month has gone by without one in effect somewhere. And the tactics seem to be growing in frequency. Governments usually claim the measure taken to prevent from using social media to coordinate violence. Now, this is not paranoia, people. These people have a history of overthrowing governments with their social media. This was Tunisia. This is 2011. Just go back 10 years. Tunisia protests, the Facebook revolution. All of them were called the Facebook revolution. Libya, Egypt, Syria, all of them were used by Facebook and Twitter to organize these mobs, the same mobs we see here, like in BLM and Antifa. This was the same exact stuff. A group of young Tunisians have organized their anti-government protests online and helped depose a dictator. They were successful in Tunisia. They overthrew their government. Mike Gigolo talks to the country's leading cyber warriors. A group of young Tunisians have organized the anti-government protests online and helped depose a dictator. For more than a month, protests have swept across Tunisia. For more than a month, protests have swept across Tunisia. It all sounds familiar, people. It's all the same stuff. But Ali, a key organizer, has hardly left his home in a mid-sized town far away from the capital. In fact, he seldom leaves his desk. In a phone interview, Ali asked to remain anonymous for fear of arrest. Estimated that he spent at least 18 hours a day in front of his computer running a Facebook page that has become the primary source of information on the protests. Okay? Ali leads the SBZ News, a team of cyber-savvy activists who have been collecting, dispatching photos and videos from sources throughout the country, posted it on Facebook, and sending updates over Twitter. Okay? They ended up overthrowing their government here, people. Now I'm going to show you this short clip of what happened in Egypt, because the same thing happened in Egypt. You'll see how similar all this is to what's happening here.
Tonight, of course, the increasingly volatile situation in Egypt and the changes we're seeing.
This is 2011, January 2011.
I'm John Bullis from CNN International, and we have a big hour ahead. We certainly do. Anti-Mubarak protests in Egypt have now spread to the U.S. and other countries, and we're going to show you all of that. Listen to this. Impassioned Egyptian Americans gathered in Washington today calling for the removal of Egypt's president. They rallied first at the Egyptian embassy and then marched to the White House. Now, inside the White House, President Barack Obama huddled with his national security team to discuss the crisis in Egypt. There's a lot at stake for the U.S. because Egypt has been one of America's biggest Arab allies in the Middle East. Similar protest videos and eye reports from all over, including Atlanta, Boston,
all stage protests, just like over here.
Switzerland and Canada. You will see and hear from the people in those places throughout our coverage tonight. And John, in Egypt, it is now midnight, but it's been a long and volatile day of demonstrators calling for the removal of President Mubarak. Police have largely left the streets now, but they've been replaced by Egyptian military. Social order and security have collapsed across Egypt's largest cities. Dozens of people have died. Looting and lawlessness are rampant. Without police, many shopkeepers are arming themselves to protect their stores from looters, the same for those who live in their homes. The ancient port city of Alexandria is also in the crosshairs. CNN senior international correspondent Nick Robertson has been in the thick of it all day. He joins us now. Nick, there's a curfew in place. Are there still protesters out there? What's the situation?
You're CNN.
It's a very different situation to last night, John, where you still had a lot of people on the streets. And
CNN was involved in all these revolutions.
Been in place 8 hours, and I would say for the last 2 or 3 hours, the streets have been very, very quiet. You see just maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people walking around, the odd car going along. What's different about those people walking through the streets when you see them now? If you see a group of 2 or 3 men, or even an individual man that I saw walking along there just now, they'll be carrying a stick. A lot of people are carrying sticks with them now because there are no police, and they're afraid about their own security out here on the streets. Huge protests through the day, but now it's very, very quiet. Looking behind me along the Corniche, which was just jammed with protesters marching up and down there earlier on, John.
Nick, it seems that something has essentially changed over the last few hours. When you were out on the streets earlier today, it seemed all very friendly. The people were chanting. But as night has fallen, these looters have come out on the streets. It's become a very dangerous situation. How would you assess it going forward? What will we see in the next couple of hours as daylight comes up?
You know, it's very hard to tell. And just as you're speaking to me there, I heard 3 shots go off in the distance behind me down there. And I can hear men shouting, and I can hear things tumbling to the ground. What's going to frustrate the crowds here is that they want President Mubarak to step down. But how do they do it? They march up and down the streets. I've heard from him on television. What about what they're doing today is actually going to bring him down? He's already proposing people to fill senior leadership positions who the people on the streets here say are part of the problem. So you can see that the frustration on the streets here will grow.
The sign is in English.
A handful of soldiers who are out here essentially providing security around some government buildings. The potential to come into conflict with them if the crowd decides to storm a presidential palace here or go
the sign is in English.
Government building, the soldiers are going to have to choose: do they shoot or do they just, or do they not? And at the moment, the soldiers seem relaxed and not prepared to take the crowds on. But I talked to one former general here today who told me that
another English sign.
This was the plan that he understood when he was a general in the army here, and that is that the army army is to protect the president and not the people, and that's the choice they might make. So although that doesn't seem immediately apparent today, I think we're going to see the frustrations grow, and people, to us, are vowing that they will come out every day and continue this protest, John.
Yeah, of course, tomorrow, Sunday, the start of the working week in Egypt, that will be crucial because we've seen these protests grow over the last couple of days in size. But whether or not they continue to grow when people have got to go back to work, when schools are reopened, and whether this momentum continues, possibly in all of this, Hosni Mubarak is gambling that these people will simply give up, that they will all ultimately, this may end peacefully, they'll go back to their homes and life can continue on as it has. Is that a possibility there?
It doesn't seem like a possibility at the moment. Just where I was hearing those shots back over my shoulder over here just a few minutes ago as we were talking, I can now hear somebody speaking on a megaphone on a loud hailer. Clearly, it seems addressing the people in that area. Not quite sure. I can't really hear what's being said, so I'm not quite sure what they're being told. But I think that what the people have tasted here is the sense that they have a voice and that they can have an impact. And they believe that if they continue with that, then they're going to achieve what they want. Will they go back home and settle for less? That's not what they're saying right now. More than 31 people have died in this city already. People are very angry, very frustrated, and it doesn't seem that that can easily, if you will, be put back in the box. Having said that, some people have told us they are very worried about what's going to happen to security. Neighborhood watches are in force here. Shops are boarded up. People are worried now without the police. There's a vacuum of security. There's no law and order. So that's going to guide some people. But as you see in these demonstrations, it's the loud, angry voices that come out and want to stay out. Some of them you can tell are spoiling for a fight. We've seen today more presence of the Muslim Brotherhood here providing control on these demonstrations. They lack leadership so far, and that means they may diffuse, as you suggest. But if they find leadership, that will give them focus and purpose, John.
Okay, guys, that's what just happened here. This is what Twitter and all these people and Obama, this is what they've been doing all around the world. They just brought it home.